You're tuned to Florida Matters. I'm Matthew Petty. Like a lot of your friends and neighbours across the Greater Tampa Bay region, you're probably looking forward to putting the 2024 hurricane season in the rearview mirror. Well, the season's not quite over just yet. But if your home or business was damaged by Hurricane Milton or Helene or Debbie, it may take some time to get your life back in order. And you may have questions about anything from navigating insurance claims to applying for help from FEMA and assistance for your business. Ahead this hour, you can call in with your questions about recovery, legal issues, even mental health. Call 813-755-6552. That's 813-755-6552. Share your insights and hear from people across Tampa Bay about how things look in your neighborhood a month after Milton. That's ahead on Florida Matters. First, this news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Windsor Johnston. Republicans are on the cusp of retaining control of the House, which would give the GOP a trifecta come January, control over both chambers of Congress and the White House. Speaker Mike Johnson says it's time to move on and turn the page in the next Congress.
This is something that the American people desperately need and deserve. We are going to raise an America First banner above this place. And you saw a demographic shift that I was talking about on the campaign trail for over a year, who came on board with us because they believed in what we were saying. They believed the answers that we were providing for all the great challenges facing the country.
Republicans are closer to claiming House control. 218 seats are needed to hold the majority. President-elect Donald Trump has signaled there could be big changes coming to the Justice Department and the FBI. NPR's Carrie Johnson reports on the transition process.
The Attorney General is going to be the most important job after the president's in the next administration. That's according to Vice President-elect J.D. Vance. Trump's considering a number of candidates, including Senators Mike Lee of Utah and Eric Schmidt of Missouri. Longtime Washington lawyer Mark Paoletta, a close friend of Justice Clarence Thomas, is also in the mix to lead the Justice Department. FBI Director Chris Wray has more than 2 years left on his term, but he's had a tense relationship with Trump, who may want to replace him. An FBI official tells NPR Wray continues to oversee day-to-day operations and is actively planning to lead the Bureau into next year and beyond. Carrie Johnson, NPR News, Washington.
Saudi Arabia has hosted leaders from the Middle East and Muslim-majority countries for a summit. They ended with a statement calling for a halt of global arms shipments to Israel and for its suspension at the United Nations. NPR's Aya Batrawi reports the summit did not commit nations to abide by specific measures.
Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman opened the summit by reaffirming support for a Palestinian state, denouncing Israeli attacks on Iran, and accusing Israel of carrying out a, quote, genocide in Gaza, which Israel denies. Arab leaders, many of whom are opposed to Hamas, have been divided on how to contain the war, which has spread to Lebanon. And countries like Egypt and the UAE have kept ties with Israel, even using their ports for Israeli shipments throughout the war. The summit is the second of its kind to be held in Riyadh since the Hamas-led attacks of last year that killed 1,200 people in Israel. Israel's military has since killed at least 43,000 Palestinians, most of them women and children, according to Gaza's health ministry. Aya Batrawi, NPR News.
On Wall Street, the Dow was down 252 points. This is NPR.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Schwab, with Schwab investing themes like artificial intelligence, renewable energy, or pet passion. Over 40 themes to invest in. Learn more at schwab.com. And the Doris Duke Foundation.
You're listening to WUSF 89.7. I'm Craig Kopp. After a trio of hurricanes battered the Tampa Bay area this season, counties like Hernando are still cleaning up the mess. Emergency Management Director David DiCarlo says Hernando continues to experience flooding from Hurricane Milton over a month later.
We're in long-term recovery right now. I want to manage expectations. The water is going down, but it is going down slowly.
DiCarlo says they are still calculating exact damage numbers from Milton as well as from Debbie and Helene. He adds Helene destroyed at least 12 homes and left over 400 with major damage. We'll talk about damages from the three storms and take your calls coming up next on a live Florida Matters. More than 40 people were arrested during another undercover operation targeting unlicensed contractors who attempted to prey on hurricane victims. The Pinellas County Sheriff's Office conducted the two-day sting in Clearwater Beach last week. Eric Gandy is Clearwater's police chief.
We haven't had this kind of storm damage here in Clearwater previously. It, in some instances, was catastrophic. These houses were completely destroyed, infiltrated with water. We're just here to make sure that our citizens don't take another hit from an unlicensed contractor.
Another sting in Madeira Beach last month netted 60 arrests. If you were hoping for gas prices to drop below $3 a gallon, you may have to wait a bit longer. After falling to an average of $3.01 early last week, they jumped back up before settling back a bit over the weekend. AAA Auto Club says the average for a gallon of regular unleaded in Florida is $3.08 a gallon. That's 7 cents more than the lowest average last week, but 7 cents less than the highest point last week. AAA says the increase is the result of higher crude oil prices. Motorists across the Greater Tampa Bay region are paying slightly more at $3.11 a gallon on average. I'm Craig Kopp, WUSF 89.7 News.
This is Florida Matters. I'm Matthew Petty. 3 hurricanes in just over 2 months. That's the legacy so far of the 2024 hurricane season for the Greater Tampa Bay region. First Debbie, then Helene, then Milton. In some counties, tens of thousands of homes have been damaged at a cost of billions of dollars. In unincorporated Pinellas County, Hurricane Helene destroyed 441 homes and damaged more than 28,000 more. The price tag on that storm alone for that portion of Pinellas County is more than $2 billion, and that doesn't include the 24 cities within the county's borders. Hurricane Milton destroyed nearly 300 homes in unincorporated Pinellas County and damaged thousands more. Here's the county's public information officer, David Connor.
It is going to take a while to recover from this storm, and the available resources and the needs kind of change every day.
Well, over the next hour, you're going to get some insights into how other parts of the Tampa Bay region are faring and tallying the damage too. And your voice is an important part of this conversation. You can call 813-755-6552. That's 813-755-6552. What questions do you have about the recovery, whether it's getting assistance, legal issues, mental health as well, in the aftermath of the 3 storms so far this hurricane season? This hour you're going to hear from Brady Penn. He's an external affairs officer with FEMA. Also welcoming to the show Charles Gallagher, attorney with Gallagher and Associates in St. Petersburg, and Clara Reynolds, Crisis Center of Tampa Bay president and CEO. Thank you all for joining us this hour. I want to start with you, Brady. What help is available through FEMA, and how do you apply for it?
Yes, thank you. And first of all, thank you very much for having me on. The number one goal we have here following a storm like this, or a set of storms like this, is to make sure that folks have awareness of the resources that are out there and are able to apply for FEMA assistance if they're eligible or if they were impacted by the storm. So thank you for what you're doing and your part here to spread that awareness and having us on. So yes, of course, our number one goal, like I said, is to have people apply for FEMA assistance. They can do that. Really, the easiest way is going to disasterassistance.gov. There they can create an account, upload documents, fill out an application. That process usually only takes about 20 minutes or so to initiate that process. And from there, each case will be different, and folks will be able to work through the process, as it kind of unfolds. Mm-hmm. Another way to do that, if they don't have access to the internet, or if they, just feel more comfortable speaking with someone, they can call 1-800-621-3362, which is our hotline. That's a source for another person on the end of the phone who can answer questions for you, can help you fill out an application, can help create an application for you, and get your process started for applying for FEMA assistance. And the last option is going to a disaster recovery center. There are currently about 20 disaster recovery centers throughout the state of Florida currently operating. That number fluctuates a little bit as as some locations have to close for different reasons, or they move potentially to better serve communities. But folks can go to those disaster recovery centers, sit down with someone in person, a FEMA representative, who will be able to walk them through the process. At this stage in the disaster, a lot of people already have applied for assistance, and maybe hitting a sticking point, whether it's needing more verification of residency or something along those lines. So these disaster recovery centers can be really helpful for folks who initially applied, maybe didn't get immediately approved because they were missing some piece of their application, and can get some help at those centers to upload new documents or talk through some sticking point that they might be having. So we do want to, of course, highlight as well that the deadline for applying for Hurricane Debby assistance is today, actually.
Right.
And so folks have until midnight tonight to apply. Like I said, that process can take as little as about 20 minutes. But once you get that application in, you can continue to work through the process after the deadline, but you have to get that application in by tonight.
Just in terms of what actually is available there to Brady for folks, I mean, when we talk about assistance, are we talking like money, kind of other resources? I know there's a Blue Tarp program, which we can talk about as well, but if you are in immediate need of help, what can you expect FEMA to actually help you with?
Absolutely. I mean, the resources are really very numerous, and include everything from FEMA direct grants. Like, so you mentioned, a lot of people will be eligible for a direct grant from FEMA, whether that's for potentially repairing a damaged car, everything from a damaged car to damage to your roof or siding, or potentially even greater damage than that to your residence.
Yeah, like cars did get totaled during that storm, or that series of storms, right? We saw cars getting totally inundated. So that's a big blow for folks.
Absolutely. And a lot of people aren't aware that, they may be eligible. They may think, oh, FEMA's only for, people whose homes were completely destroyed or something like that. But we want to make sure that that's clarified, that, really anyone who was impacted by the storm, who suffered, even if it was financial damage or personal property damage, anything throughout that, any damage or impact that you had, there really is no downside to applying and to putting in that application. When you're working through the application process, there is actually an option to receive additional information about other resources. And now those other resources, are very numerous as well. We've got, nonprofits, we've got state organizations, local organizations, state and local government. All of these different entities have different resources that they may be able to provide survivors as well.
You're listening to a live special edition of Florida Matters. I want to get some calls from you as well. If you are one of those folks that Brady Penn from FEMA has been talking about, maybe you've already applied for some assistance from FEMA. Maybe you haven't figured out what you need yet, or you just haven't gotten around to it for other reasons. The number is 813-755-6552. That's 813-755-6552. It'd be great to hear some stories about how folks are getting on as well. It's been a pretty bad month in terms of hurricanes impacting the Greater Tampa Bay region. Hurricane season isn't quite over yet, but tell us how your neighborhood is faring and some of the challenges that you've seen arise. I want to bring Charles Gallagher into the conversation now. Charles, you're an attorney with Gallagher & Associates in St. Petersburg. What kind of questions are you sort of seeing pop up in the aftermath of these three storms? Because sometimes people will be talking about insurance. They'll be having issues with maybe damage to their homes or property, and they're not sure, what the kind of legal implications may be. What are a couple of things that people need to be thinking about as they move into the recovery phase?
The three main areas we're getting calls on would be storm insurance claims, whether it be a regular homeowner's policy or a flood policy. Secondarily, we're getting a lot of calls on landlord-tenant issues. What is the obligation to pay rent once there's damage to a leasehold, it's not habitable? And also getting some calls on mortgage issues. Both Fannie and Freddie have programs recently enacted that permit forbearance under the storms with no penalties for the homeowners. So getting a lot of calls across all three spectrums. In terms of the first one, so much about what does my homeowner's policy cover versus flood. So a whole lot of that. And then again, tenants, so many tenants calling in discussing whether or not they have the right to terminate their lease. Can they move out if the property is not habitable? A lot of issues across the board and beyond that, yes.
Are you getting calls from folks from the kind of landlord side as well, sort of saying how do they navigate things with tenants?
Probably more tenants than landlords, but yes, some landlords have called. And the idea is that we're kind of trying to impart are this is a catastrophic area of regional damage. And whatever your lease says, probably best to go ahead and err on the side of some grace in favor of your tenants. If the property is not habitable, I can't imagine trial judges in Florida saying that a tenant's got to go ahead and pay rent when they can't live in that house. And so we're trying to encourage some kind of macro ideas that are helpful for the whole community, and folks are being receptive. On the tenant side, unfortunately, we're hearing stories of landlords wanting to seek rent for periods where a tenant can't live there. And I don't think Florida law supports that. I think there's definitely a basis to have the tenants permit suspending rent when they can't live there. So across the board, we're getting both calls from landlords and tenants, probably more tenants though.
If you've got questions about hurricane recovery, now's the time to call in 813-755-6552. That's 813-755-6552. Let's go to Donnie calling in from Tampa. Donnie, you're on the air.
Yeah, good afternoon, sir. I just wanted, and I believe there's a question in this somewhere.
Okay.
I filled out the application process with FEMA, and that, of course, is the government possibly helping me out, even though almost every category of the relief, and they're the ones that set the categories, has been denied thus far. I've got one pending yet on a vehicle. But also, I wanted to say, since you were talking about landlords and tenants, there's another type of landlord and tenant. And in my particular case, my storage unit officials blocked our access completely to the property so that nobody would know that there is no proper drainage on that property whatsoever. The sewers, if you will, stormwater does not exist and does not work.
Wow.
And my unit took on some damage. Now, you talk about favoritism. I know people that applied with FEMA and immediately got $750 put in their bank accounts or mailed to them in a check. They provided, in some instances, no evidence. I provided photographic evidence of how I got my vehicle damaged. The brain got fried because it went into a low power source when I tried to get through some water near the storage unit. And, I feel like I've been kind of hammered. And there's an appeal process they claim you can go through. But my storage unit not only didn't give me any grace for a unit that I had no access to for a week and a half or 2 weeks, and flooded. They gave me no grace and charged me a $20 late fee.
Right. That sounds rough. Thanks for calling in, Donnie. Sorry to hear about your struggles. I think there's a couple of questions in there which we can probably split up, but let me just tackle the litigation aspect or the legal aspect if I could. Charles, what about that, the notion of a landlord, in this case, I guess the owner of the storage unit, kind of denying access to it or shutting things down there? I mean, is that something that you've seen, and what sort of recourse would somebody like Donnie have in that situation?
Certainly. Well, the first issue is going to be that will probably be governed by whatever underlying contract, whatever lease agreement exists between the rental facility and Donnie. And hopefully that lease speaks to access rights and potentially access rights in the time of maybe a hurricane, maybe a disaster. So if it's a public safety issue or safety issue, maybe there's a basis to go ahead and restrict access. If there's not, and if it's a matter of improper drainage, you probably have a breach there on the part of the landlord and probably have actionable rights on the part of a tenant of that facility. I would look long and hard at that lease to see what kind of rights you have in terms of your property and how it's maintained and what you do in the event of a landlord default. Horrible to hear about a late fee being charged where the property is unusable because of flooding and the lack of drainage. But I'd sit down, and as painful as it might be, I'd sit down and read that lease cover to cover to see what kind of rights exist in your favor and what kind of rights that the landlord has imposed on that themselves. but I would expect it to be landlord friendly if they're the ones drafting it. So give at least a read and see what kind of rights you might have to declare a breach on the part of the landlord.
And Brady, if I could bring you back into this conversation, I think our caller Donnie had a question about kind of what the process is or what sort of evidence you need and how you figure out, whether your claim is valid or not. Are there some pointers there for folks in that situation? What do they need to provide for FEMA or, if they're making that sort of claim?
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, I definitely sympathize with folks working through these processes, especially in light of, 3 different storms hitting the state in pretty rapid succession. This case, every case is going to be different. I would say that it's just from that, brief kind of description, I would recommend, going to one of these disaster recovery centers. It sounds like a case that's, kind of complicated, maybe, there was documentation, but it wasn't initially available due to he mentioned restriction of access to his storage unit, for example. So a lot of those things may be eligible, but if they aren't initially in your application, you may get a letter that says you haven't been approved. Now that is a little tricky because people receive a letter that says you were not approved, but it's really not a denial. It actually if you read those letters, a lot of times they will provide reasoning for why the recommendation was made or the determination was made. And even bringing those letters to one of these disaster recovery centers and sitting down with an agent, one-on-one, showing them the letters, talking through that can clear a lot of that.
Yeah. So it sounds like the bottom line is you've got to be a bit persistent there. I want to get another call on. We're going to a break in a little bit, but before we do, let's go to Sam. I believe Sam from St. Petersburg. You're on the air. What's your situation?
Hi there. Actually, a lot of the information that you guys just gave is very helpful. I essentially was one of the lucky ones. Almost everybody I know lost everything. I had water intrusion into my attic, which then caused my living room ceiling to fall in. It's now affecting my HVAC system and all sorts of stuff. There were probably 5 different kinds of molds. That's like remediation. But I actually was having a really difficult time with FEMA because I guess they said I gave them the wrong date of the storm and they denied me. So I think the information you just gave about going to the center or wherever their location is and just trying to sit down and talk face-to-face to a human might be helpful. I also had a question about my tenant who, because of the mold, refused to return other than to get their stuff and has broken the lease, which is fine. I mean, if he doesn't want to be here, I don't blame him. But I was going to see if there was any sort of recourse I could take there because I had heard that there was a possibility to regain lost revenue from tenants that no longer felt safe in the home.
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, sorry about your house. That sounds like a bit of a nightmare to go through, and I hope things kind of can get patched up for you, Sam. Charles, let me just bring you back on for a moment. So what kind of rules are there around folks who break a lease because of the damage to the home they've been renting? How do you kind of navigate that? Sounds a bit tricky.
Certainly. And what I will start with is the idea of freedom to contract. The idea that the parties, when they begin that relationship as tenant and landlord, they have the right to go ahead and agree to the terms of that. So if there is some term of the lease that permits maybe lost revenue as a result of a breach, then you have that as a possibility. But if it's not spelled out in that lease, you're probably not going to have a court give any kind of thought or consideration to lost profits as a result of a tenant moving out. There is what I call kind of a ripcord provision under Florida law, which is called a notice of material noncompliance, where a tenant can give written notice to a landlord and say, look, there's a defect here, a hurricane hit it, I can't, live in there, it's moldy, this, that, and the other. You've got 7 days to fix that. If you don't fix that in 7 days, on day 8, that terminates as a matter of law with no obligation to pay rent going forward. Ideally, you will have that set forth in your lease beforehand. You'll have addressed that in the lease. If not, you have this statutory default provision where a tenant has the right to go ahead and tender written notice to a landlord of repairs needed. If the repairs aren't made timely, that lease can be terminated by that tenant. So hopefully the lease establishes what the expectations are among the parties, the rights, the obligations. If it doesn't, you go ahead and default to that statutory construct. But hopefully that lease would speak to that. If a lease does not talk about any kind of entitlement to lost profits or lost revenue, I wouldn't think that's going to be something available to the parties in that event. It's going to be, strictly construing that lease and giving the power to contract to the parties and according rights to that lease. So I'd read that lease. Unfortunately, that's the advice it's going to hear a number of times, but read that lease, see whether or not there's any entitlement to that in there. And that hopefully gives you a little bit up on things.
You're listening to Florida Matters and a conversation about how the Tampa Bay region is recovering from the impact of Hurricanes Milton, Helene, and Debbie. You can share your experience of storm recovery and questions you have about getting assistance, legal issues, even mental health. More of your calls at 813-755-6552 when we come back.
I'm Nancy Guan, a reporter at WUSF. Like you, I'm busy, and I need help staying on top of what's going on. I depend on the Wake Up Call, the daily newsletter from WUSF. It starts your weekdays with a quick early glance at the important news happening in the Tampa Bay region and the world. You get quality reporting from WUSF and NPR journalists, and connections to local artists, events, and more. Sign up is easy. Just visit WUSF.org.
You're listening to WUSF 89.7. I'm Susan Giles Wintech. For more than 20 years, neighbors have helped neighbors through Season of Sharing, presented by the Community Foundation of Sarasota County. Learn how you can change someone's life and make a difference with a tax-deductible gift at cfsarasota.org. WUSF gets support from listeners and Caldwell Trust Company, an organization which has been navigating clients toward their financial goals since 1993, building wealth and preserving legacy the way it's meant to be. Learn more at ctrust.com. Many listeners have named WUSF in their wills. It's an inspiring way to support this station that enriches your life and the lives of others in your community. Your gift will make a lasting difference for WUSF and will trigger a matching donation of up to $10,000. Get started online at wusf.org/legacy or call Kathy Jordan at 800-741-9090. The Spectrum Bay News 9 forecast for today from meteorologist Julie Marquez. Sunny and hot today with a high of 88, evening lows around 72. Another warm day tomorrow.
You're with Florida Matters. I'm Matthew Petty, and you're tuned into a conversation about recovery from the hurricane season that we've experienced in Tampa Bay so far. Hurricanes Milton, Debbie, and Helene, 3 to impact the Greater Tampa Bay region this season. Here's Sarasota County Emergency Management Chief Sandra Tapfumene.
3 storms in a season is pretty rare for this area, but storm season was definitely very busy.
So flooding was a big problem for Sarasota County from that trio of hurricanes. Debbie damaged more than 1,000 homes countywide, and then came Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton, destroying 141 homes between them in Sarasota County, damaging thousands more properties. What was your experience with hurricane season, and how is the recovery going for you? If you have questions about getting assistance for your home or business, dealing with legal issues, mental health, call 813-755-6552. That's 813-755-6552. And with us this hour, Brady Penn with FEMA, Charles Gallagher, attorney with Gallagher & Associates in St. Pete, and Clara Reynolds, Crisis Center of Tampa Bay President and CEO. Clara, dealing with the immediate impact of a storm is stressful enough, but what are some of the stresses that kind of emerge during the long-term recovery from a series of storms like this?
Well, thank you, Matthew, for the opportunity to be here today, and I've enjoyed listening to both Brady and Charles, and certainly the callers, Donnie and Sam. I think both of them kind of illustrated what we're seeing at the Crisis Center of Tampa Bay. You have individuals that have basic need issues, food, clothing, shelter, and on top of that, they have seen devastation. They have experienced it firsthand if they were actually in their houses as destruction was happening, or they had to walk into it. So in all of these situations, individuals experienced a trauma, essentially. Whether you were listening to the wind or you were watching the water come into your house or you walked into it. What we're also seeing are those individuals, and Sam kind of referenced it in her call about, a little bit of it could have been worse. And so we certainly are having people call us that have almost what you would call survivor's guilt, right? They didn't experience maybe what their neighbor or their family member felt, but they're still struggling with the emotional impact. So for all of these individuals, when they call us, and Matthew, we were talking beforehand, we have seen an increase in certainly in our call volume during the 10 days between Helene and Milton. We saw 2,500 calls, but about 90% of those calls, individuals also expressed emotional stress and distress. So we are dealing with all of those things. And one thing, when you get to a place where your home is either livable or you have figured out just your day-to-day, the other impact is that your way of life has changed. And as we are, we've gotten through the election season, which was highly stressful, but now we're entering into the holidays. And so for individuals that have children that are going to be off that week of Thanksgiving, their normalcy is going to be uprooted again. So all that being said, whatever you're feeling right now, everybody was impacted in one way or the other, and those feelings are normal. What we are saying at the Crisis Center of Tampa Bay is talk about them. Talk about how you're feeling right now. Don't downplay it either. I think that's what a lot of people are saying. Oh, I don't have it as bad as somebody else. It doesn't matter. Utilizing and talking to other people will provide you with just so much tremendous support, allow you to really purge everything that's in your system so that you can take steps forward.
Right.
And we also know that for those who have the ability, action, doing something really helps to alleviate anxiety. So making sure that you are getting involved, helping your neighbors, helping your friends, that goes a long way in helping you get to a place of better and some emotional regularity.
Let's go to the phones again. A lot of folks calling in. Manisa in Tampa, you're on the air. What are you going through?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm actually calling on behalf of my niece. About a week before the storm, her car had got towed. She paid the fees that need to be paid so that she could pick it up, and they kept giving her a runaround about actually being able to pick the car up. Lo and behold, the storm comes. The lot flooded. The car lot flooded where her car was stored, and her car no longer works. And the people said that they won't do anything in regards to it. FEMA isn't doing anything in regards to it. I just want to know, is there any recourse? Is there any help? She's stuck without a car. She has 2 little boys and needs to get around.
That's a great question. Well, thank you for calling in. Charles, back to you. What sort of options would there be for somebody whose car got towed and it's kind of storm-related, I suppose?
So generally speaking, when someone would have your car in that respect, they call it a bailment. And there would be a bailment that would impose some obligations and requirements upon the person holding that. Where it's being towed, potentially for being in a space that's not authorized somewhere, the question then would turn to what kind of expectation does that property owner have of their area? Flooding, not flooding? Is it a low area? The biggest problem we have in this case would be that of a natural disaster, 500-year storm, and whether or not there's knowledge that they've got adequate drainage there or the cars are kept in a safe kind of space. So kind of need to know more facts about that fact pattern to see whether or not there might be liability there in favor of the car owner and against the tow yard. If the tow yard knew that they had to safeguard these cars and keep them in a higher place, you may have some cause of action. If it's something that's not known, if they believe that they were above sea level by many feet, never had any flooding issues there, you might find courts say this is an act of God, this is a natural disaster, not the fault. So I'd try a little more about what that tow yard knew on the condition of their property and whether or not it was going to be a place that would be unsafe to have those cars held and secured. So they've got an obligation to have it in a safe way. Of course, they have to have it locked down and such, but that would go a little further as to the analysis of Were there prior problems there? Were there drainage issues there? Was there an expectation it would flood there? If there was, I think they got an obligation to move those cars so they're not going to be destroyed or ruined as a result of the floods.
Yeah, but as we saw, there's a lot of damage to folks' cars, and people need them to get around. In some perilous situations, of course, people are living in their cars, so that's even worse. But yeah, a lot of issues people are working through there. Let's go to Crystal in Tampa. Crystal, you're on the air.
Hello. The
Hey.
first thing I'd like to do is thank FEMA for their incredibly prompt responses to me, coming out with inspectors, finding issues that I didn't know about,
Okay.
depositing money in my account very quickly, but also telling me about things that FEMA is not able to do when in unusual circumstances. Like, I own my mobile home, but I do not own the land.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a 40-foot sweet gum tree that is lying on my roof. There's about 8 tons of tree on my roof.
Yeah, that
Nobody's
sounds big.
been inspected. And the park has done nothing about, because they think it will be cheaper to allow it to crush my neighbor's home and mine and pay us off and get us out than to repair it. And the attorneys are so overloaded right now, they can't even take us on. We don't know what to do.
Well, Crystal, thank you for calling in. Yeah, that sounds like a pretty serious situation. A couple of things to get to there, but I want to take another call before we do. James, you've been waiting patiently, so you're on the air. What are you thinking about? What are you seeing?
Well, I have a situation with the second hurricane, not the one that I was told that you were talking about, the first hurricane.
Right, so there's Debbie, Helene, and Milton. So you had an issue with Helene?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. The second hurricane, when it hit, it was the strongest wind, and it tore up my roof. I've survived all the other hurricanes, but this time it pretty much took all the shingles off. My question is, where do I find a recovery center?
And you're in Hudson, is that right?
I'm in Hudson, Florida. I went to Bill O'Reilly's office and I called Brad Yeager. He's a state representative, but I still don't have a recovery center telephone number, address.
Okay, well, let me see if we can get some answers there. So, Brady, back to you. What would be the closest recovery center? I mean, this is a little bit of off the top of your head question, I guess, but where might James go to find somebody to talk to about his particular situation there if he's in Hudson?
Absolutely. So the first thing I would do, you can go to FEMA.gov/DRC. So that stands for Disaster Recovery Center. So FEMA.gov/DRC. And at that website, you can type in your zip code, and you'll be provided the closest disaster recovery center to your location. You can also call that 1-800-621-3362 hotline and ask them to direct you to the closest disaster recovery center.
Could you just repeat that hotline again?
Yeah, it's 1-800-621-3362. And so the easiest way would be through the internet and to Google, or go online and search up, FEMA.gov/DRC. And that's the fastest way to find your closest recovery center. But if you're having trouble getting on the internet or whatever other reason, or you would like to check the status of your application, you can call that 1-800 number and get all that information there. I will say that, that we had a caller a little earlier, several callers, I guess, talking about, kind of checking the status or finding out, why they received a letter that said they were not approved. And I would just say that, the top reasons that folks don't get approved right away is, either one, they need to provide some proof of occupancy. or two, they failed to connect with their inspector. And we just had a caller talking about, the inspectors coming to their home. If you had damage to your home, FEMA will need to send an inspector to go verify the damage. And so, they'll be calling you, they'll be texting you, hopefully, but a lot of people don't answer, unknown callers, or a lot of times we don't have our phones, we might have them on silent or something like that. So I just would encourage anyone who's applied to keep an eye on their phones and try to connect with those inspectors, because if you're unable to, FEMA can't verify the damage, and it may delay your assistance.
Right, but just sort of back to what we were saying before, you do have to be a little bit persistent. And as you were saying, there's a couple of different routes to kind of get the information. If you're not maybe so comfortable with going online to try and get that info, there's that 800 number as well, and we can repeat that sort of as we go through the show. But in the meantime, if you have questions, the number is 813-755-6552. You want to talk to our FEMA representative here, or Charles Gallagher, attorney, or Clara Reynolds with the Crisis Center of Tampa Bay. Obviously, people are going through a lot in terms of the kind of the sort of mental and physical kind of challenges that have arisen in the aftermath of these 3 hurricanes so far. So your questions are welcome at 813-755-6552. That's 813-755-6552. And we'll get to more of your questions in a moment.
This is WUSF 89.7. You can also listen on WUSF.org. I'm Susan Giles Wentech. The Hastings Fall Festival of Art is November 30th and December 1st, with live music, mural demos, and Highwaymen artists R.L. Lewis and Curtis Arnett. More at visithastingsfl.org, funded by the St. Johns County Tourist Development Council. WUSF gets support from Brandon Business Machines, serving computers and copier needs in the Greater Tampa Bay area since 1981. Learn more about a complimentary assessment of your copier and computer needs from Brandon Business Machines at bbmusa.com.
I'm Lisa Mullins. We check in on Haiti, where the interim prime minister has been fired, and that's caused even more turmoil in an already rocky democratic transition. The move comes amid continued gang violence and Donald Trump's election victory, casting doubt on what the U.S. role may be going forward. That's next time on Here and Now.
That's coming your way at 1 o'clock here on WUSF 89.7. Now on the Zest podcast, get your caffeine fix with a visit to the St. Petersburg headquarters of Kawa Coffee. Owners Raphael and Sarah Perrier talk about growing their business over the past 18 years, which beverage trends have staying power, and what they really think of Starbucks. New episodes of The Zest come out on Thursdays. Listen wherever you get your podcasts or at thezestpodcast.com. A YouTube video reveals a dike breach during Debby that caused mysterious Sarasota flooding. You can read that story online at WUSF.org. This is WUSF, your home for NPR.
This is Florida Matters. I'm Matthew Petty, and you're hearing about recovery from the trio of hurricanes that have impacted the Tampa Bay region so far this season. Over a span of 65 days, the region felt impacts from Hurricanes Debby, Helene, and Milton. Flooding has been one of the biggest challenges of the hurricane season, and floodwaters have taken a long time to recede in some counties. Here's Hernando County Emergency Management Director David DiCarlo.
We're in long-term recovery right now. I want to manage expectations. The water is going down, but it is going down slowly.
So what questions do you have about hurricane recovery? 813-755-6552 is the number to call. That's 813-755-6552. And with us this hour, Brady Penn with FEMA, Charles Gallagher, attorney with Gallagher & Associates in St. Pete, and Clara Reynolds with the Crisis Center of Tampa Bay. Clara, back to you for a moment. I mean, what are some of the challenges that you're anticipating into December and the new year and the aftermath of this storm season?
I think as we approach the holidays, we're going to see many individuals that are really going to struggle because traditions and things that families have traditionally been able to do together are going to be disrupted. Many folks have lost, maybe heirloom holiday decorations. Maybe there's just not enough resources in the family to do what you would normally do at the holidays, whether that's a big meal with families, maybe that has to do with gifts, all of those things. And that's going to cause increased stress and pressure. And I think as both Charles and Brady have talked about, as people are getting either their FEMA denials or approvals, as well as their insurance, I think that is also going to play in. You have a lot of people that are either cautiously optimistic or terribly pessimistic, but once they get those answers, then there's going to be a new set of stressors that are going to add to the mix. So all of that is really going to combine and create a lot of stress and pressures for everybody across our community, regardless of your age or your background. And this is one of those other interesting storms where you saw individuals who have never had to ask for help before come forward and ask for help and assistance. So it's also an opportunity there as well.
Yeah. Let's go to Steve on the line from Tampa now. Steve, you're on the air. What's on your mind? Steve, are you there? All right.
Hello?
Hello. Hey, Steve, you're on the air. What's on your mind?
So with the two storms, our first storm, we were taken out by the flood, and it made our house where we couldn't live in it.
And which one was that? Was that Debbie?
Doesn't provide for payment to rent another house. But the second storm did take off parts of the roof, and the ceiling came in. And our homeowners does provide coverage for that. So would that kick in, or would that be void because we were taken out by the first storm?
That's a complicated question. That actually may be a good one for Charles. Charles, what do you think about that? I mean, are you getting questions from folks who are just wondering how these different storms that are impacting their properties are interacting with each other and whether one kind of might cancel out your claim from the other? What are you hearing?
You'd call it a co-insurance claim where you have maybe two insurance policies or two losses. So, and we're advising folks to go ahead and make claims under each event, under each policy. For example, obviously Helene was more of a flood event, and flood policy is probably going to be the more appropriate vehicle there for relief. Whereas Milton was more of a windstorm claim where a homeowner's policy likely provides coverage for that. So I would go ahead and make claims with both carriers in the event you've got flood loss for a flood, in the event you've got the roof issues for your homeowner's policy, and let them sort that out. It's not your job to go ahead and make a assessment of what damage occurred to what. Your obligation is to go ahead and exhibit your property and provide access to the property so the carrier, the adjuster, can figure that out. But definitely, under your homeowner's policy, yes, there is entitlement for wind-driven rain into a hole into the property. So bring claims to both carriers for both events. Let them go ahead and sort that out. You do have the ability to withdraw claims if you find out that that's not the case or there's not a covered cause of loss for a certain event. But make claims under both policies, and your adjusters for each respective policy will likely sort out the causation issue and the co-insurance issue. You may have an issue where each carrier is paying some pro rata share of the loss. You may have a scenario where others bear the whole loss and one doesn't cover it. So make your claims to all different carriers for all different events, multiple events, and let them adjust the claims properly.
All right. Some good advice there. Let's go to Stephen now in St. Pete. Stephen, you're on the air.
Yes, sir. Mine is not a question more than an awareness of how difficult it's been to get compensated pay-wise. I play in a band locally. As you know, so many places on the beach that got damaged. And I've been trying to get unemployment, and tragedy is the effort one has to make to get assistance, and and I understand why people give up. And what's interesting, I just heard about 2 weeks ago on this station about the number of elderly people that aren't able to go on and know how to fill out forms. I mean, I'm not saying I'm Einstein, but I can get around and do pretty good. But it's daunting. It's a tragedy and a catastrophe that those who need help have to go through so much paperwork and forms and waiting online. It's endless, and I still haven't gotten any kind of help through Florida Gov or whatever it is, the job, right? And still waiting on. And we were renting our place. It got flooded out, and still waiting on FEMA on that. You know, the personal property. Well, then we had to do. You know, everybody got scared because of Helene. Everybody says, "Well, I'm getting out of here for Milton," and so we hightailed it out of here and incurred traveling costs and hotel rooms and all those kind of things. So and I have nothing to show for literally hours and hours and hours on the phone filling out paperwork. That's the tragedy after the tragedy.
Stephen, I feel for you. Yeah, it sounds like it's just adding to your stress there. Just quickly, Brady. I mean, there again some FEMA kind of challenges, I suppose, thrown into the mix there. With he's talking about unemployment, but in there saying that he's still waiting on some claims there. A quick word of advice for Stephen about sort of going back to that and making sure that he's done what he needs to get that claim fulfilled.
Absolutely, and of course, you know, this series of storms have been really challenging for everyone who suffered damages, and as was mentioned earlier, you know, these are traumatic events, and people go through a lot. A lot of people have lost, you know, everything through these storms. And so we definitely, you know, want to make it as easy as possible for folks to get back on their feet, to, you know, get some financial assistance or you know, whatever kind of assistance they may need to kind of get back into a sense of normalcy. And so I mentioned earlier that, you know, when you apply, you know, there are additional resources that FEMA can, you know, share with you, whether that's through the Red Cross or other nonprofits or local or state agencies that are providing assistance. And hopefully, you know, that patchwork of different organizations can help people, you know, kind of, you know, just bridge that time, bridge it financially or however whatever their issue may be or challenge may be, you know, it can help bridge that gap for them. I know that, you know, as far as the challenges with registration, I did mention, you know, that the initial registration process is quick, but you know, we do encourage folks to, you know, read those letters, to continue to call back in. I know it can be time consuming, but you know, if you need the help, you know, that's what we're here to provide, and we're here to assist you. We also have teams going out, and he mentioned, you know, elderly folks and people who may have you know, challenges with getting around. You know, we have disaster teams, assistance teams running, you know, kind of going out into communities. We work closely with local governments to identify, you know, communities that may have challenges getting to the disaster recovery center. So we've got some teams going out door to door, so that we make sure to really, you know, leave no stone unturned and make sure that everyone who was impacted gets a chance to register.
Just quickly too, can you remind us the hotline number that you were giving out earlier, which was pretty helpful, I think, for folks?
Yeah, absolutely. That hotline number is 1-800-621-3362. And by calling that number, you can check the status of your application. So we hear some folks mention, you know, they applied and they kind of, you know, they haven't heard anything yet. They're unsure of where their application stands. If you call that number, the agent on the other end will be able to give you an update about where your application is. And, you know, again, one of the biggest reasons we see for folks not getting assistance quickly is that an inspector is not able to connect with them and set up a time to meet them at their residence. So if you call in, it's possible that the agent will tell you, you know, that the inspector has tried to contact you but hasn't been able to yet, and that can, you know, kind of get your application back online and moving forward.
Sounds good. Yeah, let's go to Janet calling in from Zephyr Hills. Janet, what's on your mind? Janet, can you hear me? You got to turn your radio down too. Janet, are you there? Okay, it sounds like we might have... Oh, you're there. Okay, yeah, go for it.
Could I have a phone number to get credit for your food loss? We had no power for 9 days.
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for that. Real quick, back to you, Brady. I think this is one for you. If you could just kind of address this really quickly, would that 1-800-621-3362 number, would that help kind of applying for some help with food loss there?
Absolutely, and it is again, it's a case by case, process. So not all food is necessarily covered. So a lot of people obviously lost power and had spoiled food. Usually, the assistance that you'll receive from FEMA will be for really pressing needs. If you have medication that was lost or things like that, FEMA may be able to assist. But generally, food is not covered. But certainly, again, I would encourage anyone who suffered losses or damage to apply, because working through that process, can, kind of highlight some losses or some eligibility that you may not have been aware of.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to Eric. Eric, you're on the air. Where are you calling from real quick? Okay, sounds like we might have lost that one.
No, I'm here.
He's here. Okay, Eric, what's on your mind?
So initially when I filed with FEMA, we didn't think we'd have to leave our house, and then the HOA came through and said, because we had minimal damage, we had like maybe a half an inch of water, didn't even get through the entire house. We cleaned it up with some mops, we were fine. And then the HOA came through and said, no, every unit in this community is getting remediated. You have to be out within 2 weeks. Go find somewhere else to live, and you got to keep paying your HOA on top of it. So unfortunately, when I filed with FEMA, I didn't file that I was losing my house or would have to have lodging. So now trying to go back and do that, you can't edit that online. So I'm assuming the only way to do it is call, and how time consuming is that?
Right.
And do I have to keep paying my HOA every month for services I'm not getting? Okay,
there's a couple of questions in there. We're going to have to get through these pretty quickly, but real quick, Brady, is calling the best way to try and amend your FEMA claim, or is it better to go to one of those places in person or go online? What's the best way to do that?
Yes, I would say definitely call the 1-800 number. They should be able to help you update your application, and you can do that throughout the process. So if you've applied for, let's say you applied after Milton or after, let's say Helene, and then you suffered further damage after Milton, you can create a new application. You will need to do separate applications for the separate events. And I heard someone earlier mention, they put in the wrong date. And so you can go in, you can update your application at any time, and as your situation changes, hopefully get the assistance that you need.
Yeah, and the last 30 seconds here, Charles, I don't know if you can do it, but paying HOA fees when you're out of your home, what are the options there?
Short answer is yes. Otherwise, expected claim of lien and even a lien foreclosure. What you're paying for in that monthly amount is not just related to your use. It might be a proportional share of insurance for the common elements. It might be to maintain yards and maintain the pools and such. So it's a wise move to go ahead and pay those monthly fees as they come. Otherwise, I'd expect a lien and potentially a lien foreclosure action.
Yeah.
That would.
So tough situation there. Well, I want to thank all of our guests for this special live episode of Florida Matters. Clara Reynolds, President of the Crisis Center at Tampa Bay, and CEO, I should say as well. Thank you so much, Clara.
Thank you, Matthew.
Charles Gallagher, attorney with Gallagher & Associates in St. Petersburg. Charles, thank you so much.
My pleasure, thanks.
And Brady Penn, Public Information Officer with the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Brady, thank you.
Thank you.
Florida Matters executive producer is Grayson Doctor. Engineering support from Dave Anderson and Jackson Harp. Chris Sampson answered the phones. Production assistance from news director Mary Shedden. You can subscribe to Florida Matters wherever you get your podcasts and watch on YouTube. I'm Matthew Petty. Thank you for watching, listening, and calling.
You're listening to WUSF 89.7 Tampa. I'm Susan Giles, Wintech. Glad to have you here. Today on The Daily, last Tuesday, voters across the country approved measures to